So without further ado, our first speaker is Carolina Sapiain, who will be talking about how to deal with the problems of safeguarding the scenic heritage in the face of this global crisis. Carolina, they are all yours.
Thank you very much. It's difficult to speak after Pavel, but I try. I do the best. Well, I'm from Chile, but I have lived in Paris for 15 years. I am a scenic, I'm stage designer, graduated from University of Chile, and have an MA in University Libre of Brussels in Belgium and Paris 8 in France. I resident alongside my work at the Paris Opera House and French National Theatre. I have specialized in scenic heritage. So, I haven't spoken English for a long time. So I prepared with video with my presentation. It will be more easy for me and for you specialized. So, where we go?
The first thing we can say is that this cultural heritage encompasses valued material and immaterial assets that contribute to the cultural identity and understanding of society, history, and evolution. Among these assets are performance art-related cultural goods, which can be categorized as material scenic heritage, including theater, building, costume set, props, and the other objects, and immaterial scenic heritage, like tradition, knowledge, craft, and scenic expression. Unfortunately, scenic heritage is often undervalued compared to the other forms of heritage, and the lack of policy and management from the performing arts sector has led to the loss of significant part of this heritage. An illustrative example can be found in Chile, where the precarious state of performing art, worsened by ongoing health crisis, has deeply impacted the creative process of artists. This situation has left workers without established income and social security, while companies and cultural space struggle to ensure their continuity. Consequently, the concern for safeguarding scenic heritage has been largely overlooked or left to an uncertain future. But it is essential to address this issue today because, following the Chilean example, now with the Santiago Municipal Theatre Opera House, Chile's most important scenic heritage, which is at a risk of being abandoned due to the lack of measure and budget for its protection. Regrettably, similar challenges are faced in many places worldwide, and finding solutions seem particularly difficult amidst the current global crisis. Scenic heritage confronts various obstacles, including inadequate funding, lack of government support, unsuitable storage space, limited public interest and recognition, and scarcity and training and education in this field. Given the challenging panorama, raising awareness and advocating for the rescue and dissemination of scenic heritage are crucial. Scenic heritage bears witness to cultural, traditional, aesthetic, and technological change and artistic movements that have influenced societies, region, and community. It serves as a source of learning, inspiration, and enjoyment for present and future generations of artists and audience. To address this issue, further research and work are necessary, taking into account successful examples that can serve as model. I would like to present two examples, one in Europe and one in South America. Two such examples are the National Center of Theatrical Costume and Design in France and Colón Fábrica in Buenos Aires. The French Center is part of a pilot scheme for the conservation of a unique cultural heritage, dedicated to the conservation and research of material theater heritage where I did an internship and specializing in the subject, and where I also had the honor of inviting its director to Chile to give a conference. With collection of more than 26,000 pieces, this center is one of the world's biggest museums specializing in stage costume. Recently, and given the success of its museum, a space dedicated to scenography and these trades called La Scène was inaugurated, which highlights the profession of the performing arts. This center not only protects and preserves scenic heritage, but also disseminates and teaches it to the new generation. Similarly, Colón Fábrica, a project of Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, aims to transmit the creative, cultural, and productive potential of theater in southern area of the city. The space not only accommodates artistic production and stagecraft, but also provides professional training and preserves scenic heritage. Through this effort, Colón Fábrica fosters cultural identity, strengthens community bonds, and promotes active community participation. This successful example prioritizes three fundamental aspects: conservation, education, and dissemination. Unlike other initiatives, they go beyond mere preservation and emphasize the importance of education and dissemination. This comprehensive approach has tangible impact on society by fostering cultural identity, strengthening community bonds, promoting active community participation, and contributing to personal and community development. In summary, the success of this initiative lies in their ability to involve the community in the preservation and dissemination of scenic heritage. And also because there was willingness of the part of the state and the corresponding cultural authority to make this project a reality. In conclusion, scenic heritage is a valuable source of culture and art that deserve preservation and protection. Its safeguarding is essential for the understanding and study of society's history and culture, as well as for the formation of cultural identities and the promotion of creativity and innovation. To ensure the preservation of scenic heritage, it is necessary to document and catalog works and elements relative to performance art. This documentation not only enables the protection and dissemination of this heritage, but also allows for the identification of loss of endangered species, thereby driving rescue and restoration efforts. Furthermore, active community participation is vital in guaranteeing the preservation of scenic heritage. The community can play a crucial role in identifying works, space, and objects in need of protection and restoration. They can also support governmental and organizational efforts, visit related space and activities, and advocate for the safeguarding and dissemination of heritage. Regarding the role of the state, it is crucial for relevant authority to promote policies that initiative the protection and preservation of scenic heritage. These policies should allocate budget and resources of safeguarding, restoring, and cataloging elements relative to performing arts. Additionally, the state should prioritize education and training programs to cultivate professionals qualified in the conservation and restoration of this heritage. And I want to emphasize that in countries like Chile, it is very difficult to develop projects like this without the willingness of the state. The work of recent awareness about the importance of this asset is a challenge that I have been working on for several years, and I hope I will materialize soon. So, how to approach the problem of safeguarding scenic heritage in front of the global crisis? I believe that to ensure the safeguarding of scenic heritage, it is essential for all relevant actors to work together. The state, the community, artists, professionals in the field, and performing arts organizations must collaborate to identify, protect, restore, and disseminate their heritage. Only then can we ensure that current and future generations can appreciate and benefit from this rich cultural and artistic wealth that is an integral part of our society identity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was Carolina Sapiain. Our second splash talk speaker is Daniel Landez, who will be talking about touching the intangible. Daniel, are you ready? We are.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming. It's a privilege to be speaking here today. My name is Daniel Landez, and I'm a Master of Architecture candidate at Princeton University in the United States, and I'm also a freelance set and projection designer. Today, I'll be briefly sharing a literature review and formal analysis of La Danza de los Voladores, the performance practice you see on the screen here. La Danza de los Voladores is a pan-Mesoamerican ritual that has been performed for at least the past 2,500 years, in which a group of voladores, translated flyers, descend upside down and spinning from the top of an erected pole back to the ground. This performance practice is packed with symbolism, which has evolved throughout time under introduced pressures from colonization and capitalism. Numerical indexing, color relationships, ritual institutional killing, and more all come together in Los Voladores to originally render physically tangible the invisible Nahua cosmology and imperial power. Over time, these symbols have been transfigured continually with the evolving power schemas and cosmologies developed in the land we now know as Mexico. Through researching this performance evolution, I interrogate how the incomplete archive reveals the values of a hegemonic, white, Euro-American society, and how we, as designers, are meant to work in a landscape haunted by this socioeconomic visual culture. As I studied Los Voladores, I became increasingly interested in the issue of representation and how the material traces of various performances of the ritual reveal shifts within the performance practice pre- and post-conquest. Here, we see the earliest artifact depicting the Voladores ritual dating back to between 100 BC to 250 AD. This is the only known existing artifact of the ritual predating the conquest, although we also know that there are numerous traces, glimmers, and residues in the Munosian sense, which also survived. Now housed in the Yale University Art Gallery, the scene is bound into a circular figure and plan, and we can see traces of yellow, blue, red, white, and black pigment across its entire surface. An alternating series of 13 red and white stripes are painted on the central pole. These 13 stripes are not insignificant. These are the 13 layers in the Nahua cosmos, each split into 4 quadrants going in each cardinal direction, making in total 52 quadrants, the number of years in a Nahua century or life cycle. The next known representations of the Voladores ritual were not created until the colonial period, when the Nahua population had contact with the Spanish conquistadors. These representations are found in a series of codices which document the Nahua population's history and practices, beginning from their migration south from the ancestral homeland Aztlán, the land that is now known as the Southwest United States. In the codex we see here, 4 voladores are depicted atop a flying pole wearing hats, which resemble bird heads and a pair of wings. All 4 are holding a stalk of grain. And next to the 4 flyers, a man is tied to the top of a ladder. This ladder imagery represents the voladores' corresponding sacrifice to Xipe, the god of agriculture. The voladores appear to all be wearing white, and there is no defining color usage other than the introduction of green pigment in the grain stalks the flyers are holding. Another similar depiction of the voladores, the Códice Porfirio Díaz, completely omits the flyers. Here, we see the erected flying pole topped by a square framework with which ropes for the flyers are strewn through. Again, next to the flying pole is another depiction of the Xipe sacrifice. Similar to the Códice Fernández Leal, there is no defining color usage in the representation of the voladores and Xipe performance practices. We do, however, see emerging patterns, like the blue-green jaguar at the base of the flying pole and the kneeling position of the subjects observing the ritual. With the Códice Azcatitlán, many major shifts occur. The kneeling subjects from before are replaced with the disembodied heads of mendicant friars. The bird-like flyers from before are replaced with cherubim, and the sheepish sacrifice is replaced with the baptism of a Nawa subject. Throughout the following 3 centuries, depictions of los voladores continue to get drawn and painted. In his famous 18th century Historia Antigua de Mexico, the Jesuit scholar Francisco Javier Claviero represents the voladores as 4 literal birds tied to a framework that 3 human subjects climb on and swing from. In the 19th century, painter Carlos Nobel painted los voladores with 8 performers instead of the customary 4. And in the 20th century, painting Voladores en Tajín, an imagined history is depicted with viewers on the steps of the Pyramid of the Niches, watching 4 flyers wearing green, blue, red, and yellow bird costumes descend. In the present, los voladores look something like this. Performed mostly at fairs or in tourist destinations like the Zocalo in Mexico City, los voladores wear red huipiles over white shirts and pants, feathered headpieces, and black work boots. The central pole is occasionally still a cut-down tree, but a steel column is more typical now, allowing for more repetition of the performance and an even more extreme height to begin the descent. From this analysis of the various representations of the voladores ritual throughout time, and an accompanying literature review, I developed a series of diagrams which chart what I view as the main shifts in the performance to accommodate for pressures from colonization and capitalism. First, the performance as it existed pre-conquest. The right is embedded with color and numerical significance. After the initial contact of the conquistadors, elements of the performance begin to get banned, are performed in secret, or are forgotten. Soon, the performance practice is Catholicized, and its base 13 logic becomes a base 12 logic, reminiscent of the 12 disciples. It's not long, however, before all numerical significance is stripped away, and what we are left with is a performance practice which exists primarily as a touristic commodity, a monument to capital. This formal analysis led to a breakthrough question for me. How, as a designer, can I appropriately render physical traces of my cultural memory which have already been transfigured into spectacle via colonization? How do we not become complicit? Here I use the term spectacle vis-a-vis Guy Debord's famous claim, the spectacle is capital to such a degree of accumulation that it becomes an image. I question more generally then, how can living designers leverage cultural memory to undo the subjugation of everything under the economy? This work originated in a fragmented American 21st century postmodern cosmos. As such, the notion of property as it relates to issues of value in capitalist understandings of space are central to the difficulty of engagement. It is not only impossible, but perhaps counterproductive to ask who owns the authentic heritage of a pre-conquest performance, because this notion of ownership is a construct of law that was written post-conquest. In order to discuss a method of design which navigates these cross-temporal issues of capital, I turn to the rather banal concept of respect. The Nawa cosmos rendered visible in the performance of La Danza de los Voladores provides an interesting means of beginning to discuss how to exist in conflict with respect. There is a fetishization of the human sacrifices that occurred in the Aztec Empire because these killings are viewed as external to other historical frameworks and contemporary practices. Medieval European executions via methods like burning at the stake, flaying, and disemboweling were performed concurrently to the heart extraction, beheading, and flaying in Mesoamerica. These executions extended through the conquest into the early modern period when the guillotine became one of Europe's favorite methods of civil execution. Even today, civil executions are a continued practice, with the US government legally ordering the killing of more than 1,500 persons since 1976 via lethal injection, electrocution, lethal gas, hanging, and firing squad. Even then, this conflict of engagement is impossible to universally discuss because of the complexity of the fragmented collective cosmos that contemporary society exists within. The question of how to discuss heritage in the settler colonial landscape must be a local and ongoing conversation that is specific to the contemporary viewer. In this way, the contemporary viewer situates themselves in relation to the performance practice where they can understand their incomplete and hegemonic understanding of that which precedes them. I'd like to finish by quickly showing you 2 of my own projects, one theatrical and one architectural, which begin to experiment with employing these concerns about respectability discourse. In these works, I overlay myriad cosmologies from past, present, and projective futures to refuse a conventional respect for sight and space. Instead, I prioritize a respect for cultural value, which occasionally affords chance encounters, like the double significance of the number 13 and the colors red, white, and blue to both the Nawa and American imperial projects. These projects, through touch and physical material, re-render visible the logics of our ever-evolving cosmoses, informing body techniques to consider cross-temporal subjectivities. I view this work I've shared today as the seed for a lifelong study in architecture and scenography, which is far from complete. I hope to continue this conversation with many of you here and look forward to feedback any of you may have and are willing to share after this talk. Thank you for your time and for PQ for organizing, and I look forward to discussing this further with any of you who are interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Wonderful. Our next Flash Talk speaker is Beatriz Magno, talking about the total work of art and the Modernist theater architecture. That's the point where glasses stop working. Beatriz, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming and for the organizer. My name is Beatriz, and today I'm presenting my PhD research project. My research interest is German theater architecture in the period between the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century, especially the technical developments in the theater. In this way, I intend to analyze three theater architectural plans and consider how some aspects of the Richard Wagner's idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, are implemented in those plans. At the beginning, I will present the most important aspects of Wagner's total work of art, and then I will present how Georg Fuchs, Max Reinhardt, and Erwin Piscator worked with these aspects in their theater buildings. Okay. When I examined the total work of art, I noticed two important aspects of it. According to Wagner's book, The Artwork of the Future, these two aspects are related to the concept of totality. The first aspect is about the theater as a union of different kinds of arts. The other aspect is about the theater as a place where a community can be formed. In this presentation, I would like to introduce how the architecture of the Bayreuth Festival House strained those two aspects and how the three collaborations between the theater artists and architects treat that concept of total work of art. Here we can see a picture of the Bayreuth Festival House and see how the theater architecture can guide the viewer's attention. I would like to highlight the side columns. These columns, together with the three stage frames, direct the viewer's gaze to the stage. Okay, it's not working, but according to Wagner, the movement of the musicians would distract the attention from the music itself and the performances, which is why he developed a hidden orchestra pit. The invention of the electric light made it possible to complete turn off the light in the auditorium. The auditorium was built in the shape of an amphitheater. This democratized audience was different from the other opera houses of the time. With all these Wagnerian ideas in mind, we can think about the case about the case studies, the Munich Artist Theater, the Grand Playhouse Berlin, and the project of the Total Theater. I would like to point out that none of the buildings exist today, and the research is carried out from archival documents. The first experiment I would like to introduce is the Munich Artist Theater. It was designed by the architect Max Littmann according to Georg Fuchs' ideas. Both Fuchs and Littmann saw in Wagner a model. Littmann especially appropriated the idea of a democratized audience. Fuchs, in turn, looked more at the festival play itself and the community aspects. Just like Wagner, Fuchs was dissatisfied with the audience of his time and thought a lot about the relationship between the audience and the stage. In 1905, Fuchs published his book, The Stage of the Future, which publicized his ideas for a relief stage. At the time, Littmann was already in contact with Fuchs and he drew the pictures of the book. According to Fuchs, the relief stage comes from the sculptor Adolf von Hildebrand's book, The Problem of Form in Painting and Sculpture. In this book, Hildebrand wrote about bas-relief and advocated as a type of art. This is an example of a Hildebrand bas-relief named Amazon's Hunting. Fuchs proposed to implement Hildebrand's ideas in the theater. The stage must produce the same effect as the relief. According to Hildebrand, the bas-relief is the kind of sculpture that offers the same optical relationship to the eye as a painting, because it is a kind of sculpture in which the viewer can grasp the whole work at once. He suggests that the bas-relief is the artistic form that most pleases the eye, because it already contains the perceptible totality of the work and the effect of real three-dimensionality. It is not, this three-dimensionality is not merely illusionistic as in painting. Here we can see the finished plan of the Munich Artist Theater. The idea was to have a wider stage than a deep one, so the actors were closer to the audience. At the back of the stage, there is a prospect. As in Bayreuth Festival House, there is also an amphitheatrical auditorium. Another similarity was the hidden orchestra pit, but in the Artist Theater, it was possible to hit the orchestra pit if it did not use it like in a drama play. Max Reinhardt also tried to create a festival theater and a different relationship between the audience and the stage. Unlike Wagner and Fuchs, Reinhardt wanted a theater without a frame between the scene and the wood. While Fuchs created a proscenium that connected with the auditorium, Reinhardt created an entire unity. In the Grosses Schauspielhaus Berlin, the Great Theater or the Grand Playhouse, I don't know the name exactly in English, the unity proposed by Wagner exists not only in the spiritual sense, but also in the spatial sense. Of course, there is also a stage, but it was not a traditional one. In the center, there is a large modern revolving stage. In the floor plan, you can see the stage without curtains and frames and the large prosceniums, which remind us of the ancient orchestra. The play and the audience are sharing the same architectural space. In this proscenium, there is a possibility to use it for the audience or for a scene. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the last chapter of my dissertation, Erwin Piscator and his Total Theater, which was planned by Walter Gropius. Both Reinhardt and Piscator were looking for a mass theater, but in different ways. Like the other directors, Piscator also cared about the relationship between the stage and the audience, but not only that. He used many new technologies in the theater, especially film projections. This use of film in his performances required a specific stage set that could be used as a screen. Later, in collaboration with the architect Gropius, he planned a specific theater building where his productions could be better performed. On the walls of the auditorium, it was possible to show the films, and in addition, there were also 3 different ways to change the settings between the stage and the audience, and to use other technical innovations such as moving sidewalks and the revolving stage. Here we can see some photos of the Total Theater project. Piscator had the desire to create a proletarian theater, a place where the workers could meet, discuss, and think about the reality in society. In this last photo, we can see the plans of the 3 forms of the stage. I hope that you have been able to understand me well, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dan Matthews, dear friend Dan, and we'll be talking about scenography of science fiction. Dan, this is your microphone.
Hello. The production designs of early 20th century plays from the often maligned but much loved genre of science fiction were rooted in the same visual zeitgeist that gave us well-known films like Metropolis and The Day the Earth Stood Still. The design elements in these plays were influenced by the same futurist architecture, analog technology, and space race aesthetic that influenced sci-fi filmmakers for decades to come. Imagery from later 20th century films like Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris focused on reinforcing emotional depth and examining human nature, while many Hollywood films continued to be inspired by technological invention. By looking at these pieces through the lens of scenography and considering the use of science fiction's elements and concepts in live theatrical productions, we can readily set them in their historical context and more easily identify the use of visual metaphor to express ideas and moods. We can also examine how the aesthetics used on stage can influence an audience and represent cultural concepts. Through these examinations, we can provide greater understanding of the purpose of science fiction entertainment and the role design has played in reinforcing the ideals set forth in many pieces of speculative fiction. The settings that contemporary audiences normally associate with science fiction, like outer space, technologically advanced ships, alien worlds, and post-apocalyptic dystopias, are not always easily adapted to the stage. They are generally thought to be the realm of the filmmaker who can use camera tricks, illusions, computer-generated imagery, and post-production techniques to dazzle audiences with the flashy spectacle that we have come to expect. However, the genre has roots in works that are not always focused on the dazzle of advanced technology, but rather serve as cautionary tales of what such technology can do to individuals or society. Early literary examples like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1818 or Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1886 explore the darker side of human nature that can arise when science is combined with hubris. Jekyll and Hyde was adapted for the stage just 1 year after its initial publication, and Frankenstein was adapted 5 years after its publication. Though these theatrical versions usually didn't survive long after the excitement of the original publication waned, many early speculative fiction stories were adapted for the stage, and updated versions of these stories can be found throughout history, especially in film. This is precisely why audiences today are still quite familiar with characters from 200 years ago, though they may not be at all familiar with the source material. In 2011, the National Theatre in London produced a version of Frankenstein, wherein the actors playing the roles of the monster and the doctor switched parts for each performance, further blurring the delineation of monster and man. And the musical Jekyll and Hyde has spawned revivals since its premiere in 1990. The popularity of the genre can be attributed to 2 seemingly contradictory aspects. relatable, often melodramatic stories and characters, and complex, overarching concepts that are largely critical of society or seek to understand human nature. Early writers utilized both of these aspects to create stories that contemporary audiences still find interesting. While many writers throughout the 20th century relied on campy, repetitive plot lines and stereotypical characters to continuously produce work for a myriad of science fiction magazines and dime novels, most of this work is disregarded as uninteresting and overly commercial. In contrast, writers like Frank Herbert and Isaac Asimov, who use science fiction to speculate on where science and technology can take society and how it affects us on a human level, gained more notoriety. Those like Ursula K. Le Guin and Margaret Atwood, who do all this with dynamic, developed characters, progressive ideals, and intriguing plot lines, are rare gems. The Czech author and playwright Karel Čapek was one of only a few early 20th century writers to use speculative scientific concepts to create work specifically for the stage. Theater in Europe had only recently moved away from generic, flat painted scenery to creating monumental dynamic structures with which the performers could interact. The environment on stage became less presentational and much more representational, as can be seen in experimental futuristic designs initiated by visionary artists like Adolf Appia and Edward Gordon Craig. Much of the work that followed used expressive shape and color and abstracted architectural features to create environments that represented the setting but left room for stylization and interpretation. Hollywood is perhaps the most obvious place to observe how these designs and ideals have permeated popular culture. Audiences from the United States in particular have been saturated with these visions of the future since the beginning of the film industry in the early 20th century. We often see examples of aesthetic approaches moving between popular culture like Hollywood and the stage. For example, the sanitary symmetry of Griffin Theater Company's 2022 production of Solaris in Chicago utilizes the same clean, geometric, modular panels found in many iterations of Star Trek. Knowing the budget restraints and staffing capabilities of storefront theater companies like Griffin, this is a very well-executed set and a creative use of the Raven Theater, which proudly operates in a repurposed grocery store. Likewise, we can contrast this design and perhaps parse out how pop culture has influenced our respective cultures with the 2015 production of Solaris at the State Theater Košice in Slovakia. The scenography collective Ja On Me thrust the stage into the auditorium with open grating that allowed them to play with lighting and atmospherics from all angles, and the upstage panels became projection surfaces. The visual elements serve to reinforce the overarching and complex sound design and composition for this piece, and they juxtaposed with the classic architectural features of the proscenium. It feels like a contemporary industrial concert stage dropped into a neoclassical space, which mirrors the confusion of the characters as they deal with meeting the worst mistakes of their past in the present. While contemporary examples of science fiction in live theater are constantly being produced, the cultural impact of these productions pales in comparison to that of films like Star Wars, 2001: A Space Odyssey, or, somewhat lamentably, even television shows like Buck Rogers in the 25th century. The flashy spectacle that can be produced by camera tricks and post-production techniques in the film industry post-World War II, combined with sleek production designs inspired by aerospace aesthetics, took focus over critical examinations of society. However, interesting, if not culturally poignant examples of science fiction in theater can still be found. One notable homage would be North Bergen High School's 2019 production of Alien, the Play, in North Bergen, New Jersey. The production gained national attention, including an article in the New York Times, because of its creative use of recycled materials to rather justly recreate H.R. Geiger's iconic Alien from Ridley Scott's 1979 film. In 2013, Nottingham Playhouse in England produced a staged version of George Orwell's 1984 that went on to play on Broadway and tour around the world. It gained notoriety because of audiences' reactions, which included walking out, yelling at actors on stage, fainting, and/or vomiting because of the disturbing content and how close it comes to reality. sound, lighting, and video designers for the production received several Tony and Drama Desk Award nominations for their work. Despite a sometimes deserved campy reputation, science fiction still holds sway over our imaginations and can inspire us to think differently about our world and how we relate to it. The speculative work of those who distill these concepts into visual form is often reflective of ourselves and our society, and can be thought of as a window through which to view our present situation and relationships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Our next speaker is, who has managed to arrive in the meantime, is Tessa Rixon, who will be talking about unpacking the why and the how of crafting engaging digital scenographies. Tessa, here you are.
Here I am. Thank you very much, Dan. Apologies, I came in 2 minutes late and I was standing over there for a while. So I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I come from, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, two different First Nations communities in Australia, and acknowledge that the place where I work and live is sovereign land that has never been ceded by those people. So I'm a digital sonographer, a researcher, and an educator from the east coast of Australia. And my talk today is about this sort of idea of how we can create engaging digital scenographies. So where this came from, for the past 5 years, I have been looking into what goes into making what we might call effective, engaging performances that use technology, not just as an add-on, but as Neil O'Dwyer talks about, as a core component of the design work, a performance that elucidates something specific about technology and humanity's relationship to technology. So in the Australian context, we have some incredible examples of this, but there's little discussion around how these works have been made and how these good works, these engaging works, these effective works could be recreated, or for young students who are approaching it, what methods they could adopt in their own practice. So basically, we're doing it really well, but there's a disconnect in Australia between our professional practice and our students and our education, so my students themselves. And so I set out to go and talk to Australian designers and talk to Australian audiences and find out what works, what do you like, and what can we learn from that. So this is less about a how-to, but more about a why in terms of incorporating technology into our designs. So across my research, I had 2 Australian performances that were case studies. So but due to COVID, these were both performed in Queensland in Australia. But in the future, I hope to maybe expand to other examples of performances. So one was a work called Ishmael by Dead Puppet Society, so an adaptation of Moby Dick turned into a post-apocalyptic space saga. Yes, they did pull it off. And this work made use of everything from live camera motion tracking to real-time created graphics to sort of layering in scale model boxes with a virtual production sort of style image behind them, all composited onto a screen behind the performers there. So the projection was a really core part of the design. The second was a work by our state theatre company called Boy Swallows Universe that used a little bit more traditional sort of, but core to the design and projection mapping on the set. So across those 2 case studies, I had 12 hours of interviews with creatives and designers talking about their practice, talking about how and why they incorporate technology into what they do, really nitpicking their decision making and forcing them to talk about things they've maybe never articulated before. And then I also talked to and interviewed over 600 audience members and asked them what they felt technology, how it affected their emotional connection to the work, whether they felt that the use of technology was believable, whether it remained true to the story. These were sort of quite ephemeral terms, but backed up by and sort of hiding behind this is lots of research into audience studies. But I really wanted to ask audiences these tough questions about technology, and some of the answers were fabulous. And so there's some more image there of Boy Swallows Universe. So what I came away from this, I'm still working on it now, so I'm almost finished my PhD, where this comes from, is this new sort of design framework for creating engaging digital scenographies. This is geared towards students and emerging designers, drawing on professional practice, informed by this evidence-based research. It's meant to have 4 levels of consideration, from the personal, as you as the designer, right through to the audience, moving through the team, thinking about the team and the design in this process. It encourages critical consideration of technology at all stages, and the outcome will be a practical and reflective toolkit as well for designers. So in terms of what the audience has said and how that sort of outer level of these people were making work for, what they fed back into it. So based upon the data, and I actually have hard quantitative data from this study, which in itself is quite rare in this area, but I was really interested to get some numbers and see what the numbers said. So the audiences actually, they were 3.5 times more likely to perceive a performance as engaging if they felt the digital scenography was being true to the story. How did I gauge this? I gave them what the director and the designer, I gave them their statements, their intentions, and they basically said, yeah, I agree with that, or no, I don't agree with that. Actually, technology doesn't match that at all. So when it stayed true to the story, they were 3.5 times more likely to be engaged in the performance. And when they felt the quality of technology was high, they were twice as likely to be engaged. Audiences enjoy when digital scenography enhances their feeling of immersion and emotional connection in a work, when it supports strong emotional moments, when it adds variety and versatility to the design, particularly the set design, when it's synchronized and scaled to match the performance movement, when it's integrated into the production, and they don't particularly like it when they perceive it as having no function, no purpose whatsoever, or when they talk about it as being distracting for the rest of the action. Now, I'll clarify here that everyone has a different opinion, right? What is engaging to one person is not engaging to another person. So when you get into this area of asking audiences how they feel, you can never come out and go, this is how you do it. This is the one way forward. There's always those little caveats there. But when you're talking to over 600 people or so, we kind of end up establishing a little bit of a sort of a middle ground in terms of what this group felt. So the design and technology itself, what my creatives were telling me, the design, the technology, the digital, it has to serve a purpose in the work. Now, for the designers, the professionals in this room, that will be core, that will be part of your normal everyday experience. But for my younger design students, these are some new concepts for them, really critically thinking about, why am I using this technology? Is it just here because I have it? Am I using it just because it's there? Linking the digital to the story or to the narrative. So wonderful Steve Francis, who actually designed our sound design for the Australian exhibit, said to me, the story will tell you whether it will work or not. The story will tell you whether the digital should be there. So the digital should support the energies of the other design elements and be supported by them. Integration between elements is key, or was key in these two productions. They both followed a rather linear, slightly more traditional style of performance. None of them were trying to break particular boundaries in terms of post-dramatic or post-modern or non-linear sort of based performances. So that sort of opens up another door for a different type of study. Consider how the digital informs balance and rhythm, and carefully consider material choice. So in terms of the team, these were some qualities that came out in terms of how to have creating effective digital scenography that engages audiences comes down to teamwork, which again, my students love me telling them that. It's all about teamwork and collaboration. But the professionals, the evidence actually says, yes, it's all about teamwork and collaboration. So trust and respect. My designers talked about trusting one another, particularly if they are taking risks with their technology. Prioritizing collaboration, prioritizing communication. Multiple people across multiple shows talked about this idea of being on the same page, particularly when working with technologies that were new to them. To do so, they often developed a master breakdown or a reference framework to develop the work. They talked about the purpose of their technology, and they shared a reason, a rationale for why it was there. Not just one person was advocating for technology, it served a purpose for everyone in the team. Having a shared language and reference points around the digital, understanding the needs of the other creatives, and wherever we can, bringing designers on early. Many people spoke about that, particularly when you have a work that integrates technology in such a meaningful way. And finally, on the personal level, for the designer themselves, asking why. This is a really big one, and it's one of the hardest ones. Not just about how do I put a projector in my show, or do I use motion capture, or do I integrate some sort of XR, but why? Why this technology? Why now? Why for this audience? Why for this text? Why for this performance? Whatever it might be. Why is one of the hardest questions to answer, but it's one that we really can't avoid, because the audiences could tell when technology wasn't linked purposefully to a work. Be flexible, agile, and responsive. Demonstrate restraint. An excellent video designer said, don't be tricky for the sake of being tricky, which I think is a thing that younger designers need to learn themselves as they go through. Open yourself and your process up to feedback and input from one another. Grow your own style and understanding. Go see shows, is what my designers were telling me and telling my students. You've got to go out there. You've got to develop your own style. Develop reference points for what your design sort of language is. Draw on your community to support your practice. So this is the framework, and that's my time. So where I'm going from here is to sort of write that all up and publish it, and then start to put it back into my own teaching, to use an evidence-based approach to incorporating technology, informed by what audiences want, to hopefully produce some engaging, thoughtful incorporations of technology. And that's my information there. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tessa. Okay, yes, we need the clicker. Wonderful, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Slade, who will be talking about social scenographics.
Hi. So I'm Ellie, or Eleanor Slade. I am a performance designer, mainly set and costume design is my background, since 2008, and I came to design through performance, and I did an ensemble theatre MA, and I'm now doing a PhD, hopefully soon completed PhD. I also teach at the Staffordshire University in the UK. I've got a video, so please can we start that video now? So my slides today, they show an example of an individual engagement with a version of an exercise I created, I sort of developed in 2012 to explore material agency and ensemble storytelling. So I didn't have those words, material agency, then, but it began from the desire to work from what the material offered. The version in this slide is a solo exploration recently with just a camera phone and a bowl hat, but the original exercise asked groups to describe a garment or an object or a material in very, very small steps where each person passed the object around in a circle and added a little bit of information each time. It's a little bit like Grandma's Shopping List, if you've ever played that game, a kid's game. The idea is that you gradually get to know something through detailed observation and sensory engagement and the ensemble attitude. So over the course of the exercise, you get descriptions take steps where there emerges the question of what it is that I'm bringing as the human and what it is that the hat is bringing, and where those things collide and merge and generate new situations. So I've continued this process recently through movement, embodied movement practice, using Mary Overley's 6 viewpoints, because I think there's similarities with Overley's work, especially in what she termed the laboratory of news of a difference. And it ends up not being about the object itself or about me, but the combination of the two. And I regard this as a form of scenographic conversation. And so that's really key to my PhD approach more generally. And these slides are just going to continue to play behind me. And hopefully they resonate in some way with the rest of the things I talk about. And I'm going to give you a really, hopefully, quick lowdown of what my PhD thesis is about. It's a little bit of a task for me of trying to tell a story of it in a short amount of time. I posit a critical framework I call social scenographics. The wide view it has a sort of fairly simple premise. Scenography as both a crafting and an experience of performative spatial and material encounter is social. So we know that because we craft work together, that is a social sort of engagement with each other and with materials and spaces. And you know, the relational aspect of scenography, which has been talked about lots, is really relevant to that. Bruno Latour and actor network theory forms my understanding of the social, and that has been applied to theatre and scenography before, but I'm trying to take a little bit of a more detailed lens on that and explore it in a few different ways in the thesis. So one key starting point for me is the active belief and the focus on material agency. So I feel like I'm a designer always speaking to objects, they're speaking to me, I'm engaging with what they're telling me, and my manipulation of them in design doesn't necessarily render them, you know, their agency null and void, of course. So there's they are automatically speaking, and the question is how I listen, or whether I listen, and what that might mean. There's huge complexities within that, of course, within those statements. But for me, a social angle helps to bring a focus it's not about intention, it's not a question of intention as such, it's more about how these things collide and how these things assemble to offer a change and a new situation and a new idea. So that's taking on the Bruno Latour actor network theory understanding of the social as moments of connection. Another starting point is scenographic practices beyond design. So by that, I mean, you know, scenographic practices are wide-ranging and encompassing of many disciplines. So it's just really honoring that. My interest in the scenographic practices which are social, which are in connection and collaboration with dramaturgical considerations or choreographic considerations, for example. Another key starting point is the relational practice. Scenography is a relational practice. So my work calls a lot on Rachel Hahn, one of my supervisors, and so the critical standpoint of scenographics is also key to this. There's three main arguments in the thesis. They look to articulate scenography and scenographics as social in slightly different ways and offer avenues for practicing this, actually. The first is what I call acts of conversation. So that is conversations between human collaborators. It's also conversations with the non-human or the more than human world. And that act of conversation, the word conversation, for me is it represents a collaborative back and forth and meshing. There's loads of words about this flying around this PQ, which is really, really wonderful to be part of. And I think that can manifest in many ways. For me, there's a literal conversation which forms the work of my scenographic practice. You know, yes, I produce models and sketches, but for me, I'm more interested in the work of those conversations which make the changes to what I then produce as a product. So I've gone off script a little bit, but I suggest in these moments there is a combined redirection where my process is changed due to what Bruno Latour describes as hybrid actants, whereby two or more actants are conjoined with merged actions and changed goals. Another argument is based on how Latour understands the construction of the social. So scenography and scenographics are constructed through both the materiality of the moment and the perspective that specific things meeting at a specific time, in a specific place, in a specific way, emphasizes that they are acting within a social network. There's also other ways to look at this, and assemblage is a really good one. Very big links. Again, my focus is a little bit on what it means for that to be seen as social. I focus on how the materiality and the social connection of a scenographic moment are wrapped up in each other, so that each make the other. The third argument I call generative unintention, and it's focusing on scenographic glitches in digital 3D environments, but also that can stretch out to other non-digital environments. It's claiming technology to to be performing socially beyond humans. And I argue that understanding this through the framework of social scenographics emphasizes critical and creative unintention by embracing non-human or beyond more than human scenographic agency through glitches, instability, interruption, and ambiguity. I position unintention as a generative mindset with an outlook for an overtly social scenographic practice. Just checking where we are. There are some specific overarching themes which run through the thesis and speak to why I think it might be useful to research. One is something about process over product. And so by this, I mean a focus on the processes of making work and the social work of scenographic practices that I mentioned earlier, that's not focused specifically on the output of designed products, even though those might also be part of the process. So social scenographics offers a critical framework which looks outside of product to better understand the social workings of what we're doing. And in that way, it's not an attempt to define a new way of working. It's rather ways to articulate aspects of the work we already do from a specifically social angle. Another is a desire to decenter humans within scenographic practices or through scenographic practices. I aim for a focus on the social to help clarify the social side of ecology, which is part of what we do in scenography as well. So the actor network theory framework positions humans and non-humans as having the equal agentic potential in terms of how the social flows and connects and operates as networks of connection. This states that the wider ecology of the world that we're part of includes the social aspects, and social scenographics hopes to contribute to that discussion. So for me, decentering humans in social scenographics aims to question and conceptually reframe who or what is centered in a social ecology. Have I reached the end? So I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Our final flash talk for this panel has three speakers, Luisa Pinto, Joaquim Gama, and Claudio Valente, who will be talking on Estação, Primeira de Mangueira, performative and Decolonial experience of the Samba school. I apologize if I've mangled the Portuguese. Please come along. Okay. Luisa, Joaquim, Claudio.
Thanks for coming. It's my first time in PK and I'm very happy. Sorry for my English. The performativity in Samba schools presents itself as a creative gesture in each effect that destabilizes the look, the parade, participants, and also of the spectators. The spaces destined to the production of the parade have the commitment to shape the narrative to be taken to the Sambódromo, whose population is organized based on tradition and culture for the production of a common territory, free that gives to those who act in the idea of belonging, solidarity and reciprocity. It's a social bound project founded on desire to create something in community, for the community, affirming its cultural identity and its territory. In these experiences, the performative project happens as artistic work and at the same time relational work with the outside contamination the group towards the same objective. The Mangueira Samba School is considered the largest in the world. It arises from its Afro-Brazilian traditions and beliefs of its black ancestors. The drumming, singing, indigenous influences, and also the culture of the whites are the origin of the Samba School. Prevented from participation in the white carnival parades, the residents of slum, the Mangueira, created their own blocks, and in a short time, the place became own. That's the stronghold of Samba. The performative life in Samba is the resignification for life in the slam, the desire to be recognized and respected in the performer through the luxury of the costumes, the drum beats of the battery, and the performative actions that bring the pulse and rhythm of the life in the slam, marked by tensions, sinuosity, and transformations. Last year, we had a significant performative, immersive experience when we paraded in the Rio de Janeiro Carnival for the Mangueira Samba School. That school presented itself a performative, decolonial, and anti-racist aesthetic experience. Decolonial in the modes of the production of the costumes, floats, and props. Decolonial in the rehearsals and organization of the parades, which generates unique aesthetic products with great impact of the community life. Decolonial when the Mangueirense, people of Mangueira, when wearing his costume, resides his body, and it gains other contours and social prominence. Although the costume is something temporary, transitory, by dressing the black body, it highlights the corporeal freedom of the movements, exposes his ways of living, of expressing himself, reconstruction, his ancestry, and making his existence worthy. But we can also highlight the dialogue between the architecture of the slam and the floats. In both, is the impermanence and the infinite possibilities of occupying this space. The slams, like the floats, destabilize the very notion of balance, security, and permanence in space. In the slams, as the floats, life is revealed with the susceptibilities and magical power. Both are mobile, dynamic, and trigger surprise and curiosity. Both the slam and the floats are opposite to the idea of static life. As for music, Samba, Enredo, Agenor, José, and Laurindo are the prominent figures in the Rio de Janeiro's Carnival and were important characters in Mangueira's history. The colors that identify the school and have become its aesthetic mark were poetically presented in one excerpt or songs as representation of the devotion for the Mangueira dwellers to their school, as well as the pride of belonging to the community and all its culture richness. The various shades of green and pink were explored in all the wings, reinforcing the historical character and tradition of the school scholars. The luxury through the sophistication of the elements arranged in costumes, props, and floats emphasized the richness of the culture of slam and valued the representation of the black people. The Samba schools allied artistic manifestations with social issues, thus building ideal of community neglected by the state. So please, you can show the video, please. Thank you.
Sagrado tratou com amor o nosso pavilhão. Tem aos seus pés a nossa gratidão. Só sei que Mangueira é o céu estilado. Não é brincadeira, sou apaixonado. A estação primeira é lembro passado. Mangueira e Cartola já não me deixar. Mangueira, 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 estação primeira, minha Mangueira.
Thank you very much to our 7 speakers. I would now like to ask them all to come to the stage, and we will have time for about 15 minutes of questions. Okay, and I would like to ask Zhenya and Joe to be the runners. I think Joe, could you take one more microphone from Hunza or Ivo? Okay, wonderful. Manage. Okay, that's great. Do we have any questions for any of our speakers? There was a lot, 7 very full-on questions, finishing with a samba. Or maybe some of our panelists would like to ask someone. Oh, is there a hand? I think I need to change my glasses. Please, could you introduce yourselves? Thank you.
My name is Andrew Brackett. I'm an educator working out of Nebraska in the United States. I'm starting principal research into culturally informed design practices and where the break happens from being culturally informed to cultural appropriation. And Daniel, especially with your work, I was wondering where you find that inspiration in historical cultures and historical practices and where it becomes historical or cultural appropriation.
Thank you for your question. It's a really difficult question to answer, especially in a United States context, because of our settler colonial landscape. I myself am mixed race, mixed identity, and I really believe that appropriation and assimilation are deeply entwined, and that it's a one-directional pathway, that as soon as you're assimilated, experiencing your own culture is appropriation. And so I've kind of stopped caring, and that's a very, very bad answer because it's a very dangerous answer, but I think this goes back to the issue of respectability discourse, and what is respectable, what we are allowed to do. I'm also a queer of color practitioner, and I think that a lot of my work as a queer artist is about not being respectable, or not being respectable of what the hegemonic idea of respect is.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the answer. Any more questions? Yes, there is a hand up. Thank you. Joe, thank you for bringing it up.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm just finishing an undergraduate in scenography at Aberystwyth University. My question is for Tessa. So you talked about looking to the text for knowing whether you should use digital technologies. And I've seen lots of performances that use text from, kind of pre-technology times. So I'm wondering what kind of things you look for in those texts to know whether you should use the technology or not. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think because it could be a little deceptive, right? You know, one of the works I looked at was an adaptation of Moby Dick. And so, that's something that was, written as a work of, a book, not a play, and does not mention being set in space or using projection or green screen or anything like that. So I think to sort of summarize sort of what the designers that I talked to were sort of speaking about, it's whether the text or the story or the narrative or the work calls for something that technology can bring to it, whether that's providing like a window into another world, or whether that is bringing technology to the fore because it says something about our own humanity. So in the first example of the work, Ishmael by Dead Puppet Society, they had placed this, they'd created basically a space saga where Ishmael had been recast as a female, and all the different roles had been regendered and changed and set into this post-apocalyptic world. So one of their first challenges was, how do we bring space into the theatre? They also were touring the work, so they were actually using the digital scenography to create a very scalable design product that can move between different venues. That's sort of a practicality. But in terms of the story, one was sort of, you know, we need to show space, and so that helps in that sense. It also helped in terms of being able to show multiple different locations, etc. But for them, the work, the technology and projection in that instance and the relationship between the miniature and the live feed combined the company's existing aesthetic, which is a lot of puppetry, with sort of newer, spacey technology to create almost kind of like a sci-fi scenography in that instance. So it made sense for that play. It made sense for them as compared to being sort of a linear adaptation of Moby Dick set on stage and they just sort of threw some projection over the top of it. So it's such a it's an individual team thing, it's an individual project thing, but I think the idea of does the text tell you it will work? It might be literal, or it might be that technology actually helps us solve a problem, or it says something about the work or the society or the place that we can't do any other way, and so it actually becomes essential for our design response to it.
Thank you very much for the question, Laura. Thank you very much for the answer. And do we have any more questions? Any more questions for our speakers? Yes, there is hand up. Zhenya, please, upstairs.
Hello, my name is Marcelo. I'm Brazilian, but I ask in Spanish because I don't speak English very well, and Carolina speaks Spanish. No? Yes? So, Carolina, muchas gracias por su presentación. Estoy muy conmovido por Chile, por no tener como una guarda de sus materiales de historia de teatro. ¿Usted cree que esta condición de no tener guardia de este material está siendo vendido, están poniendo en vendas, es una consecuencia de este liberalismo económico que estamos teniendo en América?
Okay, thank you for the question. I can respond in English, more easy. So he answered me for the problem for the soul, the costume heritage. But it's not only the problem for Chile, it's that situation we can see in all the world. For example, in Paris, when I work in Opera House, it's normal sell something piece, no more play. But the problem, for example, in Chile, there are no the category, no selection. It's still really near. We don't work for the problem for safeguarding. So I don't feel it's like a liberation economic we need to put the accent in the safeguarding the patrimonial costume. Not all costume in scene is patrimonial heritage. We need the selective. We need to know what we need garden. So it's a problem more deep. We need to put the base for this problem. Not only in Chile, I know in different countries of South America, in Europe too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much, Carolina, for the answer. There is a hand up. So, Joe, Rachel has a question.
Hello, my name's Rachel Han, and I'm a cultural scenographer. I actually have two questions, but I'll see if another hand goes up. I've got my first question for Ellie, if that's okay. And I'm going to ask the cheekiest question that I can ask, if that's okay. But I also think it might be useful for the room. So you got 2 words in your title, and you talked a lot about the social. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about scenographics, and in particular what you see as the distinction between scenography and scenographics. It's really cheeky.
Thank you, Rachel, for your question. Yes, so I think one of the reasons I like scenographics in terms of how you have put them out there is that it's focusing on the act of something happening which is like scenography or is scenographic in nature. So scenography, again, following you, Rachel, scenography is like the crafting of a situation and is within a theatre and performance situation. Scenography as a crafting, as a process of crafting. Scenography also as a way to describe perhaps the overarching strategy of design and movement and sensory engagement and time in performance. But scenographics for me are much more about charting the moment or marking the moment in which something changes or feels different and orientates us in a specifically scenographic way. So that could be within a theatre and performance situation. It could also be outside of a theatre and performance situation. You know, as you're walking through the woods, bam, this moment feels scenographic. And the scenographics, therefore, are kind of calling into the forefront the things which are assembling, the items perhaps, the entities within the assemblage, but also the action of them. And again, for me, it's very much the action, because I'm the social stuff. So it's the way that they act upon each other to change each other or to change the overall assemblage. But to be completely honest, it is one of those things that is difficult, and I think that's why I like it, because I'm still trying to work out what I mean by it as well. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it's better than I could have put it, so thank you.
Okay. Well, it doesn't. Yeah, there is a hand up. Otherwise, Rachel's asking another question. Yeah, Eugenia, please, in the middle. Adeline.
Hi, Dan. I just wanted to hear a little bit more, give you a chance to expand on your work. I think this idea of tracing the lineages of these ways in which we imagine the future and what it tells us about our present day concerns through science fiction, I'm a big science fiction fan, so, is really interesting. And I loved your work in that it kind of talked to the movies and the stage, and the stage that the students are making in their high schools and the stage that professional theatres are manifesting for like bigger audiences. Where are you going to take this? Like, I can see exhibitions, I can see multiple books. Like, where are you imagining this could go?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'm just kind of starting down this road, and it's because I've had the chance to go to some kind of far-flung archives and find some amazing pieces that I feel need to be shared. And I'm also a big nerd. So I hopefully maybe someday a manuscript, but I would really love to put together some kind of an exhibition and show off some of these lesser-known pieces, like The Good Soldier Svejik, but in 1984, but written in the 20s. So, yeah, nobody knows where the script is. If anybody knows where the script is, I'd love a copy. But.
Okay, so I'm aware of time. Thank you very much for the questions. And I would like to ask you now if we could thank our speakers, Carolina, Daniel, Beatriz, Dan, Tessa, Ellie, Luisa, Joaquim, and Claudio. Please, thank you.